Good morning, everyone. We're hoping there's some people on the line right now. We're probably waiting for a few more to trickle in a second, and we'll go ahead and start the presentation in a few minutes. Title for e-training as well as time study training. We are here from the Department of Social Services. So we're just going to make sure everybody on the line can hear us. If you can, there's an option on the webinar to send us a chat. If anybody can just make sure that we can hear you and just go ahead and go on there and say, yes, I can hear you. Okay, great. So we got a message in that you can hear us. I think we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, good morning. My name's Stan Cagle. I'm a supervisor in the Foster Care Audits and Rates Bureau. Welcome to the Time Study webinar. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're very excited about this work and the results it will yield. This webinar will cover the Time Study proposal presented by Foster Care Audits and Rates Bureau, along with the Department's Fiscal Policy and Analysis Bureau. The webinar is scheduled for 2 hours. However, it will likely not last that long. The webinar is audio only, meaning participants and presenters will not be able to see one another. You will, however, be able to participate using the window box chat option on your screen, and I'll have Adrian just kind of walk you through that, as well as how to unmute your phones in just a second. Additionally, we will unmute the conference line periodically, so if you want to ask us questions, you can directly shoot them at us. Please feel free to submit the questions at any time during the presentation. We'll do our best to respond to all the questions while we're on the webinar. However, some questions may need to be vetted or researched before responding. In those instances, we will let you know how we plan to proceed. I want to start by introducing some of the folks that are here with me in this room from Social Services. First is John Sanfilippo. He is the Chief of the Foster Care Audits and Rates Bureau. We also have Glenn Sang, Chief of the Fiscal Policy Section. Bill Molinax, he's a manager with Children's Programs and Fiscal Policy. Charlie Jennings, also with Fiscal Policy Children's Unit. Maria Ramos, Fiscal Policy Children's Unit. And Adrian McIntosh from Foster Care Audits and Rates Bureau. With that, let me just have Adrian let you know how to use the chat box and unmute your phone so that you can ask us questions if you'd like to.
So once again, there in the navigation pane in the webinar, there's an option for questions if you have any questions, and some of you guys responded with the yes, we can hear you, and so that would be where you would direct your questions to. Even if you write the questions here and you wanted to speak the questions for everyone to hear at the end of the presentation, you would have to input the audio pin. You can find the audio pin in the audio tab on the navigation pane, and once you enter that, you'll still be on mute until one of the moderators unmutes the listeners, and then you'll be able to ask questions at the end. But if you think of a question during the webinar, feel free to write in the questions chat log so we can have a record of all the questions so we can make sure we address all the questions fully later on. Thanks.
Thanks, Adrian. Before we get started, I want to recognize that we realize that the work you do is critical in helping children and youth who have been removed from their homes and placed with resource families in your FFA. So your work with the partners has been aimed at reducing the time and effort we ask of you social workers and administrators in this time study process. Specifically, this means social workers will only be asked to time study one time, and the department uses those results up to 2021. The FFA social workers and administrators will also be asked to participate in a brief 10-minute survey, in the first quarter of 2020. So the goal has always been to not interrupt the important work and time you spend with children and resource families. So moving on with the first slide in the background. The federal foster care program helps to provide safe and stable out-of-home care for children until the children are safely returned home, placed permanently with adoptive families, or placed in other planned arrangements for permanency. The program is authorized by Title 4E of the Social Security Act. You're going to hear that quite a bit in what I say, as well as what Maria is going to be covering. It is an annually appropriated program with specific eligibility requirements and fixed allowable uses of funds, and that's really important for you to kind of think about that. In general, the funds are available for monthly maintenance payments for the daily care and supervision of eligible children, administrative costs to manage the program, training of staff and foster care providers, recruitment of foster parents, and costs related to the design, implementation, and operation of a statewide data collection system. The other thing in terms of background, we know that social workers and FFAs are currently doing eligible activities under 4E. However, we're not claiming those dollars. So that's the reason for the time study. So the time study proposal reflects the CDFS's desire to better serve the foster youth of California by maximizing available Title 4E funding. Like I mentioned, currently social workers in the foster family agencies, STRTPs, and group homes perform some activities that are eligible for reimbursement through Title 4E funding. In California, have not accessed these Title 4E fundings to date for several reasons, but mainly because historically the federal government, ACF, has not been open to the idea of allowing non-county social workers to claim 4E dollars. However, in the current environment, they are receptive to the opportunity to maximize federal funding to better serve foster youth. Secondarily, there's not been a way for us to, or the ability to determine how much time provider social workers spend on eligible activities. So those are the main two reasons that we haven't moved forward with a proposal like this. At the conclusion of the time study process, the data collected will go through analysis and vetting by CDSS and ACF. Our hope is that at the end of the study, the outcome is further conversations with ACF in support of the department's goal on serving foster care youth. We're confident that through the time study proposal, we will demonstrate to ACF that there is an opportunity to leverage federal funding to help better serve California's foster care children. So how we plan on doing this? For this effort to be successful, we must be able to provide assurances to ACF that the state can, one, be able to distinguish those activities that are 4E eligible activities from non-4E eligible activities, and two, that we can capture time spent on social workers on 4E activities. So those are the two key elements that we have to demonstrate. As mentioned earlier, we want to be cognizant and respectful of what you do and your time. We also want to do this right, something that will hold up to scrutiny. This is a one-time effort on your part for 1 month. We are not asking you to do anything different except to take time to fill out the timesheets daily during the month of the study, which is November 2019. So yeah, just a few days away. I also want to mention, to support this effort, we are, or have, we're providing this training and we are recording it for future reference. We are also setting up an inbox for Q&As, and we will set up teleconference calls. And I don't think we actually have the dates yet, but we'll send that out to share our questions and responses from the Q&As and to address any new concerns. This support will be available through submission of time studies, which are due the first week of December. Just to give you a brief timeline here, the time study training is happening now this month. The time study will start in November of 2019. It's for 1 month. The time studies are due to CDSS the first week in December, and I believe that is December 6th, is that first Friday. So that's when all the timesheets are due. CDSS will review analysis during the month of January, and hopefully at the end of January, beginning of February, we'll have that conversation with the feds. And also, I think we plan on sharing out the results with other folks as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Maria Ramos from the Fiscal Policy Bureau.
Great. Thank you, Stan. Again, this is Maria Ramos. I'm here with CDSS in the Fiscal Policy Branch, and I'll be giving today's presentation. You guys will get a copy of this presentation sometime this week, along with some other materials, so you guys will have it for future reference. We will start off by going over a couple of learning objectives. So after today's presentation, you will hopefully know what Title IV-E is, what is time study, how to time study, and what activities are Title IV-E eligible and non-eligible. And just a reminder, again, there is that option to send us questions through the chat box, and we will be looking at those and reviewing them at the end. And it's a good way for us to keep a record and log of them. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with what Title IV-E is. So the roots of Title IV-E come from the Social Security Act that was passed in 1935. The act addressed the needs of child welfare services and gave states the ability to establish child welfare agencies and local programs that delivered child welfare services. In 1980, Congress passed the Adoptions, Assistance, and Child Welfare Act in response to a significant increase in children entering foster care, which amended the original act and created Title IV-E. So Title IV-E has two parts. Title IV of the Social Security Act provides grants to states for aid and services to needy families with children and for child welfare services. Part E outlines the actual federal payments for the foster care program. So the federal foster care program helps provide safe and stable out-of-home care for children, as Stan mentioned during his introduction. This is an open-ended entitlement grant, meaning funding is always available to ensure all eligible children can receive the services that they need. Essentially, what we spend is what we are able to get. This grant is contingent upon an approved Title IV-E plan from the state. The state must also submit to the federal government yearly estimates of program expenditures, as well as quarterly reports of estimated and actual expenditures in support of these funds. Like other funding sources, there are certain eligibility requirements that determine who gets reimbursed. In order to be reimbursable by Title IV-E, a child must first be eligible. This eligibility allows the state to claim federal Title IV-E reimbursement for both the child's maintenance costs as well as any administrative costs associated with that child. In the next couple of slides, I'll go into more detail about what a maintenance cost is and what an administrative cost is. Initial eligibility is determined based on information when that child is initially removed from the home and the child welfare agency becomes responsible for that child. Once a child is determined initially eligible, Title IV-E eligibility must be redetermined annually for the child over the duration of their out-of-home placement. If the child is determined not eligible, then that child is ineligible for the duration of that out-of-home care episode. For the purposes of this time study project, You don't have to concern yourself with the eligibility of the child. We will be doing that on the back end here. This is just for you guys to have some background and some information about what Title IV-E is. So for those children who do meet 4E eligibility and the reimbursement requirements, the federal government will share in the cost of those maintenance, administrative, and training costs. The term foster care maintenance payment refers to any payments that cover the cost of and the cost of providing the room and board and other supervision costs. Supervision in places like foster care, treatment foster care, shelter care, group home care, and STRTP care. These are things like providing food, clothing, shelter, daily supervision, school supplies, and any of the child's incidentals. You can think of this as the price to maintain the child. The administrative costs, on the other hand, are incurred when a social worker like yourself are working with the child's family, and the care provider. They include referrals to services, work associated with placing the child in a home, developing the child's case plan, and any case management activities, which again are many of the activities that you FFA social workers perform on a daily basis. The amount of reimbursable administrative costs is determined using time study. So that is the second part of today's presentation. We will actually teach you how we will be recording those activities in order for them to be Title IV-E eligible. So there are also some non-Title IV-E eligible activities. So these are some activities that do not fall under Title IV-E, and they include direct services such as providing counseling and therapy to help a child, teaching clients, scheduling services. So a social worker like yourself may perform a lot of the referral services, but scheduling and actually providing more, intense services to the child directly is not allowable. So now we'll go ahead and go into time studying, what it is, how you guys will be time studying for us, and the method that we'll be using. And again, if you have any questions, go ahead and send them through our little chat box, and we'll make sure to get those at the end. So what is time study? Time study is the process of tracking and documenting time spent on a program or project. In this case, we are interested in your activities and what they mean for Title IV-E. This is not just any process. This time study is a federally approved method to claim staff salaries, benefits, and any overhead costs. By tracking your time as a social worker, the state, us here at CDSS, can be reimbursed for any time you're spending on eligible activities. For the purposes of this project, we are interested in seeing how much time you all spend on Title IV-E eligible and non-eligible activities. This is not a new process. Social workers at the county welfare agencies that you guys interact with pretty frequently time study. I time study here at CDSS. This is simply the first time that private providers like yourselves will be involved in this process. So there are a number of reasons why time studying is important. First, it helps identify the activity and the percentage of time each activity benefits from the work that you are performing. This ensures that activities you perform that are Title IV-E eligible receive the maximum amount of funding from the appropriate sources. Again, because you private providers have not actually time studied in the past, we don't know what percentage of your work is actually dedicated to performing Title IV-E activities. Hopefully at the end of this month, and once we collect the data on that, we'll have a good idea of the amount of time you spent on that. Number two, accurate time studies are incredibly important because any incorrect, incomplete, or late time studies can cause delays or can lead to the loss of federal funding. There are a few things that can compromise time study accuracy, things like lack of training, which is why we're really making sure we go in depth today in today's presentation. Any delays in entering time, so the longer you wait to actually record your activities, the harder it will become for you to remember them correctly and accurately. Lack of supervisor review, so your facility administrators will ensure that the time studies are being filled out correctly and that they're being collected and sent to us in a timely manner. And finally, not taking personal responsibility. So again, as Stan mentioned, we understand that you guys are incredibly busy and do some very important work, but we do want you to dedicate those 15 minutes a day to recording your time study, your activities for the day in that time study. So again, just a reminder, the purpose of this project is to find out how many hours of your work are actually dedicated to eligible activities. This isn't for us to micromanage your work or for your supervisor to do that. We want you to be honest and keep an accurate record of what you actually perform, not what your counterparts do, what you do on a daily basis. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually record those activities. We use what are called time study codes, and this is how we actually track them. So this is essentially a label that is put on each activity that you perform. For the purposes of this project, we've gone ahead and created 4 time study codes that you guys will be utilizing. If you look at one of the attachments that's on the webinar, it should be labeled Time Study Codes List. You will see a list under each time study code with many familiar activities that social workers like yourselves perform daily, weekly, monthly. We've created this list to help aid you when you're determining what time study code you will be using for your activity. And again, just to emphasize, this is not an exhaustive list. There are probably a lot of activities that you're performing on a daily basis that are not on that list. If you do have a question about whether those activities go to eligible or not, go ahead and direct those to us and we'll help you place them in the appropriate code. So first up is time study code 1, and this will be used to track Title IV eligible activities performed by our FFA social workers. These are, again, these are administrative activities that are incurred when you're working with the child's family, and the caregiver. Things like developing a needs and services plan, matching and placing the youth in an FFA home, or directing them to other placements, matching and placing them, conducting any RFA approvals and activities that are related to the RFA process, participating in any child and family team meetings, trainings you participate in related topics, and on your time study codes handout, there is a list of topics that are allowable. This also includes referrals to services, resources, and supports. Time study code 2 will be used to track Title IV eligible activities performed for a specific youth when that youth is placed in a group home or STRTP. So for today's presentation, I understand that many of you guys are FFA social workers. This is not a time study code that you need to concern yourself with. Again, this is for a group home and STRTP social workers. And as you can tell from your list, these activities are largely similar to some of the activities you perform at your FFA facilities. However, we do want to distinguish between the two because we will be providing separate data for both facilities at the end of this time study project. Time study code 3 will capture non-Title IV activities such as direct services to a specific foster youth. So again, these are these non-eligible Title IV activities. So this time study code will be used by FFAs, by the group home, and STRTP social workers. I know we had a question about that in last week's training, so we just want to clarify any non-Title IV eligible activities will be claimed to time study code 3. These are activities like providing counseling, crisis intervention, and preparing or reviewing any progress notes related to these activities. This time study code is also for activities not necessarily related to work with the foster youth, things like general office administrative duties, such as staff meetings. Again, this just to clarify, this doesn't mean that you cannot perform these activities as an FFA social worker. It just means that they are not eligible for Title IV reimbursement. And finally, time study code 4 captures any leave time, whether it be sick time, vacation, personal days, holidays, or hours used for personal matters in and out of the office. These are also not Title IV eligible, but they help account for the entirety of your month's hours. So let's talk about breaks. Breaks are time that you will actually be reporting to the activity that you're performing prior to going on to your 15-minute, 10-minute break, whatever it may be. So for example, if you are an FFA social worker and you're performing case management activities prior to going on to your break, you will report that to time study code 1, case management activities. We don't need you to record any lunches, so do not concern yourself with the time you are taking for lunch. We do not need you to record them anywhere on this time study process. So let's go over how and when you should time study. As Stan mentioned, this will be for the month of November. We understand that November 1st is this Friday, so it's coming up pretty soon. You will time study for the entire month. We also understand that there are some holidays this month where you may be out or you may not be in the office or at work. we want you to go ahead and time study anytime you are actually in the facility. And as Stan also mentioned, these time studies are due the first week of December, December 6th, and they will be sent to us by your facility administrator. You will need to record your time study activities in 15-minute increments, and I'll go into some more detail about what that actually means. And finally, you will also receive a time study workbook. We will send this out to the administrators to distribute to you social workers, and it will look very similar to what is on the screen right now. So that workbook, if you go to your attachments, it is also included. It should be time study code sheet and time study code summary sheet. We'll be looking at the time study sheet first. Up at the top, you will see there is some identifying information, such as your name, your facility type, the month and the year, in this case, November 2019. And the facility, if you are an FFA, again, you would write FFA. For a group home STRTP social workers, you would write that in there. Right below that, you will see a set of numbers, a row indicating 31 through 1. Those are the actual dates of the month that correspond to November. And if we jump down, you will see an area where you can actually input your hours. So there are some examples on there. Obviously, yours will be blank, and this is where you will be writing your activities in, or the totals for them. And right down below on that purple row that you see at the bottom, this is where you will record any overtime that you are participating in. The final workbook that you guys will be receiving will be broken into the time study code, so you can actually label what activities during your overtime fall into time study code 1, time study code 2, 3, and 4. And to the right, we see where it says time study codes. So these are the same codes that we went over a few minutes ago. This will automatically total the numbers that you have inputted to the left. So you don't need to do anything here. It's just for you to kind of keep track and see the totals that you are accumulating. And once you do get your hands on the workbook, you'll be able to plug in some example numbers just so you can get a better idea of how this is going to populate and look. And finally, at the bottom and the right, you will see it also auto-calculates some totals, so eligible and non-eligible hours. And right below that, you will also see your leave hours, if you do take any of that, any overtime you are inputting, and finally a sum of all hours entered, eligible, non-eligible, leave, and overtime. So the second part of the workbook that's also included in your attachments is the master summary sheet. So this will all auto-populate from the time study sheet that you were looking at a few moments ago. This will just calculate a couple of totals. You don't have to concern yourself with inputting anything here. This is the actual page that we are very interested in looking at. And again, at the bottom right of that time study summary page, it will look at the total percentage of the hours that are Title IV eligible and not. So we want to go into some administrator roles and responsibilities. So our facility administrators will be tasked with collecting, reviewing, signing and certifying those time study sheets and submitting them to us here at CDSS. And you will see the email up on the screen is provider@dss.ca.gov. That's where our administrators will submit the final time study workbooks to us at the end of at the end of the month. That time study email should come to us with the subject line reading time study total and then your facility type, in this case FFA. And that is for us to distinguish what is coming in, because we will also be using that inbox for some technical assistance questions for you all. So let's go over a quick example of how you can record your hours and how you will actually be inputting them into the time study workbook. So here you see Susan is filling out her time study for Friday, November 8th. So she writes down 2 hours participating in a CFT meeting, 1 hour therapy session with Lisa, 0.25 hour services referrals for another youth, 3 hours case management activities, and 1 hour vacation leave. Because it's Friday, she wants to go home a little early, so she's taking that for the day. And 0.75 for a staff meeting. So again, this is what we mean by 15-minute increments. 15 minutes will equal 0.25, 30 minutes will equal 0.50, 45 minutes 0.75, and 60 minutes will be 1. So right next to those activities, you'll see that Susan has gone ahead and looked at her handout, and she went ahead and labeled each activity with the corresponding time study code. So time study code 1, 3, a couple more 1s, 4, and 3 again. And finally, she adds up her totals at the bottom. You see that for time study code 1, she is used up 5.25 hours. For time study code 3, she's used up 1.75 hours. And for time study code 4, which is that leave holiday, she's used 1 hour. So finally, now that she's recorded that on a notebook, a piece of paper, something similar to that, Susan will plug those totals into the November 8th column next to the row that corresponds to each time study code. And she's all done. You can see that it'll auto-populate to the right and at the bottom. You don't necessarily have to write your activities down on a sheet of paper like we've given in the example, but we find that it's a very simple way to keep track of your activities on a daily basis before you're actually putting them into the workbook. And finally, there's a quick overview of the process from start to finish, such as your facility administrator receiving the time study workbook, which you will get from us sometime this week. The social worker will time study in the month of November. At the end of the month, the social worker will sign the bottom of their time study sheet and obtain a signature from their administrator. 4, the facility administrator will review and verify those time studies on the master summary sheet. That facility administrator will then sign the completed master summary sheet and send it over to us here at CDSS electronically using that provider ts@dss.ca.gov email. And just a quick reminder that your time study sheets should be retained in a safe spot in case we need to request them for some verification purposes. So just make sure you are keeping those somewhere saved on your files for us to, if we ever need to request them. And finally, again, that email is also for any technical assistance questions that you may have during the month of November when you are time studying. Just a reminder, if you have a question throughout the process, go ahead and send it as early as possible. Don't wait till the last minute at the end of November when you're filling out your workbook. This is so we can get an appropriate answer to you as soon as possible and you can continue working on your time study. Any questions that do come into that inbox should be labeled time study question on the subject line. And finally, some contact information. We have John Sanfilippo from the Foster Care Audits and Rates Branch email up on the screen. And we also have our manager here at the Fiscal Forecasting and Policy Branch, Bill Molinex. And you can send any additional questions about the process or about the project itself. So now we'll go over the chat questions that were coming in, and we'll take a quick pause and get to those in a second.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you for holding. So we're going to go ahead and look at the couple of questions that came in the chat box. Again, you will have an opportunity if you have inputted an audio pin to ask us some questions verbally. We do want to encourage you to log those questions or send them to us via the chat, even if you do get them answered over the phone, because we will be sending a frequently asked questions sheet along with the presentation for you guys to reference, so we do want to keep a record of those. So the first question that we've gotten in the chat box, let me go ahead and look at that. 1 second, we're pulling up those chat questions.
Okay.
All right, so the first question is, should our placement worker be filling out the time study? So if someone wants to clarify what they mean by their placement worker. This came from Patricia Old. I guess we can come back to that one if we get some more clarity on that.
So for the FFAs, we only want the social workers to time study. Hopefully that's pretty clear, clean cut and clear.
All right, so the next question is, my FFA social worker is salaried and do not get paid overtime. Would we document overtime in the event there is a crisis after hours or on the weekend? So if there is overtime that your social worker is participating in, you would log it under that purple section at the bottom of the time study workbook under overtime. Again, we will have an area there for those activities that are eligible and not eligible, but we do want you to log them separately from the top. And the next question is, our social workers are salaried and do not get overtime. However, should any days over 8 hours have overtime logged? Yes, so anything over those 8 hours, we do want you to log it as quote-unquote overtime. So that's where you will log it in that purple section of the time study workbook. Someone asked for some clarification about the 15-minute increments. So correct, 15 minutes equals 0.25. I think that might have been a duplicate question. So 15 minutes equals 0.25. 30 minutes is 0.50, 45 minutes is 0.75, and 60 minutes equals 1.
And this is Bill Molinax from Fiscal Policy. Just for clarification, too, we are not asking you to record your time studies every 15 minutes. They will just, your time throughout the day will just be recorded in 15-minute increments.
Correct. I think there's a question on the line coming in. Okay, we'll go back to the chat. So my FFA is required by contract to complete, update, and submit quarterly reports to the various counties. Would work on quarterly reports and updating needs and services plans be considered as time study code 1? And we're going to repeat the question. My FFA is required by contract to complete, update, and submit quarterly reports to the various counties. Would work on quarterly reports and updating needs and services plan be considered as time study code 1?
Updating the needs and services plan, you would record under time study code 001. For quarterly reports, can you share with us more information about what kind of quarterly reports?
And is the social worker the one actually completing the
Yeah.
report?
And if you didn't hear that question, is the social worker actually completing the quarterly report? So what is the purpose of the quarterly report and who's completing it?
So we can come back to that question once we've received some clarification. And again, we will be keeping these so we can provide frequently asked questions. So in addition to that, someone asked if our social worker worked a 10-hour day and they flex time another day that week, should that flex time be logged under 004 or just as a shorter day? Can we get some clarity on what flex time means? We're going to put the call on hold for just a second so we can discuss.
Hi, this is Janina. Can you guys hear me to clarify the question about the flex time?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so when our staff who are salaried work, we don't have, again, we're not hourly, so we don't work 8 hours and get overtime for over 8 hours in a day. So we could work a 10-hour day one day, the next day maybe work just 6 hours to flex the 2 hours that were not quote unquote paid overtime, but were overtime. Does that make sense? So when we're flexing, we're kind of like shortening another day because we worked a longer day. So in those cases, it sounds like we work a 10-hour day, our social workers will log the 2 hours as overtime. But when they flex their time the next day, would they log the 2 flex hours as 004?
Time if it's 40 hours.
So it would not go into our overtime section. You would not log it to 004, which is that leave. You would just log it to the regular time study code. So time study code 1 if it's an eligible activity, and then 3 if it's a non-eligible activity. Does that help clarify your question?
No, and I'm sorry if I'm not being clear. So we'll just, for example, Monday, a social worker will work 10 hours. So I'm hearing that they would log their 8 hours under the appropriate codes, but then 2 hours will also fall under the overtime. Is that correct for a 10-hour day?
So hi, this is Bill Molinax with Fiscal Policy again. So what we're really looking at is what's true overtime. So if that is your regular schedule, whatever you would consider to be overtime is what you would list your activities in an overtime. So if you work, I fully understand what you're saying. So if you work 10 hours one day and 6 hours the next day,
right.
None of that's really overtime, right? That's just your normal schedule, and none of those would be for your administrative purposes or for your personnel purposes. None of that would be considered true overtime. Those are just your regular work hours. So what we would want you to do in that scenario is just record those activities in your normal, the 4E eligible or non-4E eligible under the normal work hours on the timesheet for that day. Does that make sense? Does that clarify?
I think so. I think it does. Yeah. And I think it would be FFA that doesn't have.
Yeah, when you are non-salaried, it's kind of different. But what we're looking for is anything that you would consider to be your overtime. So regardless of the hours that you work in a day, if at the end of the week you're at your 40 hours, then none of that would really be considered the overtime. If you have a flex shift and you work more hours one day and less the other, then you would just record those, your 4E and non-4E eligible activities under just your regular work day. Anything that you work as true overtime would be marked down in your overtime hours. I hope that helps.
And Bill, that's as determined by their agency.
Correct.
Employer.
That is correct. Whatever you consider to be overtime, your agency. Does that help? Okay. We'll move to the next.
I think it does help. I think the follow-up to that, I'm so sorry for all these questions, is so again, being salaried, our employees can work over 40 hours and they're not paid overtime, but should anything over 40 hours be logged as overtime in this time study, or just again as their regular schedule and just log whatever they work and how they work it?
Yeah, I understand your question. So I think that anything over the 40 hours should be marked overtime, even though you are non-salaried and it's really not, just like as myself, any of the hours that I work that's over 40, I don't get paid for it. It's not really truly considered overtime. But for the purposes of the time study, we would want you to mark that as overtime in the bottom section.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
All right, so the next question is the intake social worker. I'm assuming at this facility does not carry cases, but does the placement of children, screening calls, matching, and doing the actual placement. So I think the question is asking if this person should time study.
Yeah.
So we, for the purposes of this project, they should be case-carrying social workers. So if your social worker, if this person is not a case-carrying social worker, they should not be participating in the time study process.
Let's go to the next.
All right, so next question is, it says, good morning, my name is Hector, TLC Director. We're in Sonoma where there are wildfires. We had difficulty logging on this morning due to internet and electricity. Okay, so Hector is looking to see where we can actually view the webinar. We have some staff that are unable to view this at this time due to evacuations. We have access to the recorded session, if so, how? So we will be sending out a copy of the presentation. So as long as we have your email address, we can send you the recorded version as well as the presentation. So I'm sorry to hear that you don't have access today to today's presentation.
And we can also, real quick, we can also make ourselves available for a phone call if you do have any questions that you wish to address with us.
Thank you for that question. There might be some other individuals on the line who have the same issue. So next question, should the time study include FFA supervisors and should include ISFC social workers supervisors? So for the FFA super portion, we do not want to include those in the time study process, but for ISFC social workers and supervisors,
Just the social worker,
just the social worker.
not the supervisors.
Correct.
Supervisors not to time study at all during this time study process.
All right, next question is, what are other activities under case management?
What do you do?
Updating the needs and services plan, training, placement referrals.
So this is Bill in Fiscal Policy again. So any of the activities that you are currently performing in support of these youth that are part of the management, the case management of the youth, we're not really asking you to do anything differently than the activities that you are already performing. So if you look under, we can certainly provide in our Q&A some more examples of case management, but these are really just the activities that you are already performing that are in support of the youth that you are providing the services for.
It's a good question, though.
All right, so we actually have some clarification for one of the questions earlier about quarterly reports. So quarterly reports are completed by the FFA case caring social workers. Quarterly reports include demographics of the child, medical and educational information, summaries of birth family interactions, and visit quality, permanency plan, per court hearings, etc. It provides the county worker with a 3-month snapshot of the child's progress in the resource home, progress towards stability, and quality of life visits. So this would be an eligible Title IV-E activity. Thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, so if you are performing these activities as an FFA social worker, you can go ahead and time study that to time study code 1. All right, next question. If the services I provide do not fit within a 15-minute increment, for instance, 38 minutes rather than 30 or 45, do I need to round up to 75 or go down to 55?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say round to the nearest.
Yeah, so just whichever is closest to, go ahead and round to that activity.
But we can clarify that.
Yes. And those are all the questions in the chat. Is there anybody that inputted their audio pin that would like to ask any over the line? Again, we do encourage you to send them to us via the chat box so we can also keep a log of them. But if anybody would like to ask a question, now is your moment. And we just got one more question in the chat box, so we'll go ahead and look at that too. If case management includes activities that support the youth, however, counseling is not counted, how about home visits? So correct, counseling is not eligible, but home visits would be Title IV-E eligible. And again, that would be for an FFA social worker to time study code 1. All right, that looks like that's all the questions on here. Anybody else?
Don't be afraid to ask your questions. This is your opportunity because you will be time studying next week. So now's your opportunity. You've got all the CDSS staff in the room here to to answer your questions either now or in the next day or so.
And additionally, just as a reminder, we do have the technical assistance email inbox set up. So if you do have questions, if they do come up next week, if you didn't think of them at this moment, you can send them to us, and we will be monitoring that and answering them either during the conference calls, or we can send them out as a worksheet.
And I just want to say real quick too, for those staff who may be affected by the wildfires and are not able to participate in this webinar, if you would like to send a request to provider ts@dss.ca.gov and let us know, we can certainly put together another quick conference call to answer any questions that you may have, because we do realize that some of you may be either evacuated or without power. So we do want to make ourselves available to all of you. So just send us a request and we'll be happy to reconvene and answer as many questions for you as we can.
And just to piggyback off that and the last comment, so if you're unsure of whether any activities are Title IV eligible or not, again, just go ahead and write them at the end of your day and then send us an email, and then we can actually tell you where that activity falls. That way you're not waiting until the end of the month when you're, putting it all together.
Or worse, even guessing. We don't want you to guess.
Yeah.
We want you to be sure. So just let us know.
Anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns? All right, well, I think that concludes today's training webinar. We have actually one more comment.
Yeah, this is Stan Cagle. So I just want to say, in terms of process or next steps, so the first of the month is this Fridays, so we're short on time. We need to get you information on, first of all, we need to get you the Excel book so that you can begin the time study immediately, starting Friday. That will also include further instructions on how to fill out the timesheet, and it'll actually we're going to actually include the codes and everything that you need to be able to time study. We're also going to post the webinar, the recorded webinar, for folks that couldn't attend or as a reference. And we'll also attempt to put in there the dates of the technical assistance calls that we're going to have set up. We believe we'll be setting them up weekly, but we'll get the dates, times, and the conference call lines to you shortly as well. And again, just to reiterate, we do have an inbox set up that Maria just talked about. If you have questions between now and the next call that we do the next teleconference call that we do.
You folks have any questions about that, about next steps? Okay. Well, thanks again for your participation today. That concludes the webinar. And again, we will be making ourselves available to answer your technical questions, or you may contact me directly. This is John. I believe my contact information is in the PowerPoint. So if you have questions, let us know. Thank you again.